Something happened quietly inside the war rooms of Washington that the mainstream media simply refuses to talk about honestly, and I think you deserve to know what it actually is. The USS Abraham Lincoln, one of the most powerful warships ever built by human hands, a floating fortress carrying billions of dollars in aircraft, weapons, and thousands of American lives, is operating right now in a body of water that Iran has spent 30 years turning into a carefully engineered kill zone. And the people sending that ship there either don't understand what they've built on the other side, or they understand it perfectly and are gambling with American lives anyway. Neither possibility should give you any comfort. Because what we are looking at right now, if you strip away the political theater and the Pentagon press briefings and the comfortable illusions about American invincibility, is a strategic situation that is genuinely more dangerous than almost anything this country has faced in living memory. And the worst part? Almost nobody in a position of power is telling you the truth about it. So let's just sit with that for a moment, because I think most people, when they hear something like this, their first instinct is to dismiss it. They say, oh, Iran? Come on. The United States has the most powerful navy in the history of human civilization. You're telling me that Iran of all places, could actually destroy the USS Abraham Lincoln and take out American bases scattered across the Gulf? And I understand that reaction. I genuinely do, because we've been conditioned, all of us, through decades of media coverage, through Hollywood movies, through Pentagon press briefings, to see American military power as something almost divine, untouchable, invincible. But here's the thing, and this is where I want you to really pay attention. Invincibility is not a military doctrine, it is a marketing strategy. And marketing strategies, no matter how well executed, have a very ugly habit of colliding with reality at the worst possible moment. Now, I've spent years studying geopolitical conflict, military history, and the way great powers manage and mismanage their imperial overreach. And one thing that becomes crystal clear when you look at history with honest eyes is that the side with the most expensive equipment doesn't always win. In fact, sometimes the most expensive equipment becomes the most expensive liability. And when we talk about the USS Abraham Lincoln, a Nimitz-class aircraft carrier with a price tag somewhere north of $4 billion, carrying billions more in aircraft and ordnance and personnel, sailing into a body of water, the Persian Gulf, that is essentially a bathtub surrounded by Iranian territory on three sides, well, you begin to understand that the mathematics here are not as straightforward as the Pentagon would like you to believe. Let me explain what I mean by that, because I think this is the part that most mainstream analysts simply refuse to engage with honestly. The Persian Gulf is not the open ocean, it is not the Pacific, it is a narrow, relatively shallow body of water, roughly 990 kilometers long, and at its widest point, no more than 340 kilometers across. That's it, and Iran has been preparing for exactly this kind of confrontation for decades, not years, decades. After watching what happened to Iraq in 1991 and again in 2003, after watching what happened to Libya, after watching what happened to Yugoslavia, Iran drew a very clear and very rational conclusion. If you fight the Americans the way Saddam Hussein fought the Americans, you will lose the way Saddam Hussein lost. So Iran made a different decision. They built what military strategists call an A2AD capability, anti-access, area denial. And the Persian Gulf is the single most ideal geographic environment on the planet for exactly this kind of warfare. What does that actually mean in practical terms? It means that Iran has spent the better part of 30 years quietly, patiently, systematically, building up a layered missile arsenal specifically designed to overwhelm and destroy American naval assets in that confined space. They have the Shahab series of ballistic missiles. They have the Fateh 110 and its many derivatives, some with terminal guidance systems precise enough to hit a moving ship. They have the Noor anti-ship missile, which is an Iranian evolution of the Chinese C-802, a sea-skimming cruise missile that flies low and fast and is notoriously difficult to intercept in cluttered radar environments. They have hypersonic developments that have been announced and demonstrated. And they have something that doesn't get talked about nearly enough in Western media, which is a massive fleet of fast attack craft, hundreds of small, fast, heavily armed speedboats operated by the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps Navy, specifically trained for swarming tactics in the exact geography of the Gulf. Now here's what I want you to think about. The USS Abraham Lincoln's primary defense against missile attack is its Carrier Strike Group, a collection of destroyers and cruisers equipped with the Aegis combat system and standard missiles designed to intercept incoming threats. and in theory against a single missile or even a small salvo, this system performs very well. It's impressive technology, genuinely. But here's the problem with theory. It meets practice. What Iran has been developing and what has been openly discussed in their military doctrine is saturation attack. Not one missile, not 5 missiles, but a coordinated simultaneous launch from multiple directions using different types of weapons, ballistic missiles coming from high altitude, cruise missiles coming in low and fast from another direction, drones flying in from yet another angle, and fast boats moving in from close range all at the same time. The Aegis system is excellent. But it has finite capacity. There are only so many missiles it can intercept simultaneously before the math stops working in your favor. And in the confined waters of the Persian Gulf, the distances are so short that the warning time for incoming threats can be measured in seconds rather than minutes. That changes everything about how defense works. I want to be honest with you here because I think intellectual honesty is the only thing worth offering in a world drowning in propaganda from every direction. I am not saying that Iran would walk away from such a confrontation unscathed. That would be absurd. The American response to any attack on one of its carrier strike groups would be devastating and immediate. Iran would take catastrophic damage. Their infrastructure, their military installations, their command and control, all of it would be targeted with a ferocity that is difficult to imagine. But, and this is the crucial point that no one in Washington seems willing to sit with, the question is not whether Iran survives the American counterattack. The question is whether the Abraham Lincoln and the Gulf bases survived the initial Iranian strike, and those are two completely different questions. Because if an Iranian first strike successfully destroys or disables a carrier strike group and simultaneously lands devastating blows on American forward operating bases in Bahrain, Qatar, the UAE, and Kuwait, then the entire strategic picture changes in ways that cannot simply be reversed by bombing Tehran. The political and psychological shock of such an event would be unlike anything the American empire has experienced since at least September 11th, and arguably far more strategically significant. Think about what it would mean for the global order. Think about what it would mean for every country that has been quietly wondering whether American military guarantees are actually worth the paper they're written on. Think about what it would mean for Taiwan, which has been told repeatedly that America will defend it. Think about what it would mean for the dollar, for American credibility, for NATO cohesion. The loss of a supercarrier is not just a military event. It is a civilizational signal. It is the moment when the story the empire tells about itself, the story of invincibility, of overwhelming force, of being the indispensable nation, shatters in full view of the entire world simultaneously. That is what makes this scenario so profoundly important to understand, not as entertainment, not as warmongering, but as a serious geopolitical analysis of where we are and where things could go. Now let's talk about the Gulf bases, because I think this gets even less attention than the carrier vulnerability, and it deserves much more. The United States has significant military infrastructure throughout the Persian Gulf region. Al Udeid Air Base in Qatar is one of the most important American military installations in the entire world. It houses the forward headquarters of U.S. Central Command. It handles an enormous volume of air traffic for operations across the broader Middle East. Then there's Naval Support Activity Bahrain, the home of the U.S. Fifth Fleet. There's Al Dhafra Air Base in the UAE. There's Camp Assalia in Qatar. There's Ali Al Salem in Kuwait. These are not small outposts. These are major, well-established installations housing thousands of American military personnel. And here is the thing that rarely gets said out loud in polite geopolitical company. They are fixed targets. They don't move. Iran has known about them for decades. Iranian intelligence has had unlimited time to study them, to map them, to calculate precisely what combination of weapons would be needed to destroy key infrastructure at each one. The runways, the fuel storage, the command facilities, the radar installations, all of it has been patiently catalogued and targeted in Iranian war planning. This isn't speculation. This is the rational behavior of any competent military that knows it may one day be in conflict with a far stronger adversary. You plan, you prepare, you do your homework. The missile systems that Iran would use against these bases are not primitive. The Zulfagar, the Dezful, the Khaybar Shekan, these are precision ballistic missiles with ranges that comfortably cover the entire Gulf region and accuracy measured in meters, not hundreds of meters. Iran has demonstrated these systems. They used variants of them when they struck the Ain al-Assad airbase in Iraq in January 2020 in response to the assassination of General Qasem Soleimani. And what happened that night is instructive. Iran gave advance warning through diplomatic back channels, which allowed American personnel to take shelter, and yet the strike still managed to cause significant structural damage and resulted in documented traumatic brain injuries among American service members. That was a deliberately restrained, carefully calibrated strike. A full-scale Iranian strike in a genuine wartime scenario, aimed at destruction rather than demonstration, with no advance warning and maximum coordination, would look very different. And I think anyone who is being genuinely analytical rather than reflexively patriotic would acknowledge that. There is also the Houthi dimension, which we absolutely cannot ignore, because what happened in the Red Sea over the last couple of years has been extraordinarily revealing. Here you have the Houthis, a non-state armed group operating out of Yemen, one of the poorest countries on the face of the earth, and they managed to significantly disrupt global shipping through the Red Sea using cheap Iranian-designed drones and missiles. The American and British military response, with all its Tomahawk missiles and naval firepower, failed to stop them. Shipping companies rerouted around the Cape of Good Hope, insurance premiums skyrocketed, global trade patterns were disrupted. A ragtag armed group with a fraction of the military budget of any Western nation managed to force a strategic rerouting of a significant portion of global maritime commerce. Now take that lesson and apply it to Iran itself, a nation with vastly more sophisticated weapons, vastly more military capacity, vastly more strategic depth, and vastly more motivation. And you start to understand why some of the most sober and serious military analysts in the world are genuinely worried about what a real confrontation in the Gulf would look like. I want to say something here that I think is important and that I genuinely believe. I am not rooting for any of this to happen. I am not celebrating the idea of American sailors dying or of any human beings dying. War is catastrophic. It destroys people's lives in ways that last generations. The soldiers who get killed are not the architects of empire. They are mostly young people from working-class backgrounds who joined the military for entirely understandable reasons and deserve far better than to be sacrificed for geopolitical strategies that serve the interests of people who will never be anywhere near the fighting. And the Iranian people, who have suffered enormously under both their own government and under decades of American sanctions and interference, deserve better too. This is not about cheering for one side or the other. It is about trying to see clearly what is actually happening and where it might lead, because the people who make decisions in Washington and in Tehran are often operating on the basis of assumptions and narratives that are dangerously disconnected from reality. And that, I think, is ultimately what this comes down to: the dangerous gap between the story and the reality. The American political and military establishment has told itself and the American public a particular story about power for so long that they have begun to believe it in ways that impair their judgment. They see those carrier strike groups and they feel invincible. They look at the sheer scale of the defense budget and they assume it translates directly into battlefield outcomes. But warfare is not a budget comparison. History is absolutely littered with examples of superior forces being humbled, sometimes shattered, by adversaries they underestimated. The British Empire at its height could not pacify Afghanistan. The French military could not hold Indochina. The American military, the most expensive fighting force ever assembled in human history, could not win in Vietnam, could not win in Afghanistan after 20 years, could not stabilize Iraq after the initial shock and awe wore off, not because American soldiers aren't brave or capable, but because military power has limits that no amount of spending can fully overcome, especially when you are operating in someone else's backyard, thousands of miles from home, in conditions that favor the defender. And the Persian Gulf, let me tell you, is as much Iran's backyard as anywhere on earth. They have been thinking about this for a very long time. They are patient, they are serious, and whatever else you may think of the Islamic Republic of Iran, its ideology, its governance, its human rights record, you should never make the mistake of thinking they are stupid or that they have not done the math. Because they have done the math, very carefully. And the math, when you look at it honestly, without the comfort of the invincibility narrative, is considerably more complicated than Washington would like to admit. That is the reality we need to be able to look at without flinching, because if we cannot look at it clearly, we cannot make wise decisions about how to avoid the catastrophe that none of us, on any side of this, should actually want.